Ella Dawson kicked the suite door with her elbow, balancing a tray of overpriced room service sushi in her hands, wishing she hadn't agreed to cover this delivery shift. Room service, she called out, her voice muffled behind the tray and her frizzy ponytail falling into her face. The door swung open before she could knock again, and she immediately regretted everything about today. The man standing in the doorway was shirtless. And not the average kind of shirtless. No, this man looked like he belonged on the cover of a men's luxury magazine. Tan skin, lean muscles, and dark hair that looked like it had been styled just by existing. His eyes were sharp and dark, and they landed on her with a flicker of surprise. "That was fast," he said, stepping aside. "Come in." Ella blinked. Okay." Normally, hotel staff weren't supposed to enter suites, but he looked so casual, so certain that she figured maybe he was a regular. Rich people always had their own rules. Besides, the faster she dropped off the tray, the faster she could get down to the lobby and clock out. She stepped into the suite. It was huge. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. The furniture was so modern it looked like it had been stolen from a design museum, and the smell of expensive cologne and leather hit her like a perfume ad. "Just set it on the table," the man said, walking across the room and grabbing a glass of whiskey mid-stride. Ella did as told, but something felt off. She glanced at the receipt taped to the tray. "Wait, are you Mr. Langston?" The man turned, lifting an eyebrow. "No." Her stomach dropped. "Oh no." She scrambled for the receipt, reading again. "Suite 1712? This is 1713. She looked up at him, horrified. "I'm so sorry. I delivered to the wrong suite." He leaned against the counter, amused. "And yet I still got sushi. Lucky me." Ella stared at him, wide-eyed. "I swear, this has never happened before." "I'm so sorry. I'll just take this end." "Relax," he said, gently pushing the tray back toward her. "You already brought it all the way up. Would be a shame to waste it. But it's not yours. I have to. I'll pay for it." She blinked. "What?" He pulled out his wallet and dropped a few bills on the table. "More than a few." Ella's jaw almost hit the floor. "That's way too much." "It's fine." He sipped his whiskey. "I'm Nathaniel Drake." She tilted her head, trying to place the name. It sounded familiar, but she wasn't sure if it was from somewhere specific or just the kind of name that sounded like it belonged to someone important. "Ella Dawson," she said hesitantly. "I work at the restaurant downstairs." "Temporarily." He smiled. It was devastating. "Nice to meet you, Ella Dawson." She took a step back. "I should really go." "Wait." His voice was calm, but it stopped her in her tracks. "Sit. Eat." She laughed. "You want me to eat the sushi I accidentally delivered to you? You look like you haven't eaten today. Your stomach growled the second you walked in." Her face turned bright red. "You're not in trouble. I'm not calling your boss. I'm not angry. I'm just offering you dinner." He raised his glass. "No strings, no weirdness. Just sushi." She hesitated. Everything about this screamed bad idea. But her feet weren't moving. And honestly, it had been a long day, her head hurt, and she hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 10 a.m. "Fine," she muttered, pulling out the chair across from him. He smiled again, and it made her chest tighten in a way that was both confusing and completely out of her control. They ate. At first, it was quiet. Then it wasn't. He asked about her work, and she told him about juggling 2 jobs while trying to pay off her mom's medical debt. She asked what he did, and he gave a vague answer about investments and startups. She didn't press. He didn't seem like he was lying, just like he didn't want to brag, which honestly she appreciated. "I don't usually invite strangers to dinner," he said, pouring her a second glass of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than her rent. "But you looked like you needed it." She chuckled softly. "I don't usually eat sushi with shirtless strangers, so I guess we're both doing something new." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Are you always this quick?" "Only when I'm nervous." "Are you nervous?" She didn't answer, which was all the answer he needed. After dinner, she stood and cleared the plates without thinking. "You don't have to do that. It's habit." He walked her to the door. "Thanks for eating with me, Ella." She turned, her hand on the handle. Thanks for not yelling at me for delivering your neighbor's food. He grinned. You should deliver to the wrong suite more often. She laughed, shook her head, and left. The next day, she got called to 1713 again. She checked the receipt 3 times before knocking. When Nathaniel opened the door, fully dressed this time in a crisp white button-down and slacks, he looked at her like he'd been waiting. You again, he said. She held out the tray. This time, it's actually yours. He took it but didn't move aside. Have dinner with me again. Ella stared at him. Why? Because last night was the first time I've laughed in weeks. Because you're smart and beautiful and say exactly what you think. And because I want to. She hesitated. This is a bad idea. Probably. Okay. She had no idea what she was doing. But as he smiled and stepped aside to let her in, she realized she didn't want to leave. And that scared her more than anything. Ella didn't tell anyone about her second dinner with Nathaniel Drake. Not her best friend Tasha, who would have demanded every juicy detail. Not her coworker Jeremy, who'd probably turn it into gossip by lunchtime. Not even her reflection in the bathroom mirror, which had become her late-night confession booth. Because she didn't know what exactly to say. She'd walked into a stranger's suite by accident. Now she'd had dinner with him twice. And it wasn't just the food or the wine or the view. It was him. But she couldn't afford distractions, not with her shifts stacking up and rent due in 5 days. So when the next few days passed without another encounter, she forced herself to focus. She picked up extra hostess hours, studied late at night for the business certification she'd been putting off, and reminded herself that whatever that strange spark had been, it had no place in her reality. Until Friday. She was halfway through resetting tables after the lunch rush when a familiar voice slid through the air behind her. Seems like every time I show up, you're working. She turned slowly, heart-skipping. Nathaniel stood there in an obsidian gray coat, tailored within an inch of perfection. A black cashmere scarf was looped around his neck, and he held a single takeaway coffee in his hand. I didn't know you came downstairs, she said. I don't. Usually. Then what are you doing here? He held out the coffee. Thought you could use this. She took it, surprised by the warmth of the cup and the gesture. You brought me coffee? He shrugged. You mentioned you don't sleep much. Thought I'd help. She blinked. That was 3 nights ago. I remember things. Ella looked at the cup, then back at him. You're not normal. Not even a little. She couldn't help it, she laughed. Not politely. Fully. Loudly enough that her manager peeked out from the kitchen. Nathaniel glanced toward the back. You're about to get in trouble. Worth it, she said, lowering her voice. But seriously, you can't keep doing stuff like this. I haven't done anything. You brought me a $7 coffee. Technically, it was 8. See? That's exactly what I mean. He leaned slightly closer. Then let me buy you dinner instead. No sushi this time. Real food. I can't afford real food. I didn't say anything about you paying. I'm not a charity case, Nathaniel. I didn't say you were. She hesitated, searching his face for anything that felt like a game. But there was no smugness, no arrogance. Just quiet certainty. I get off at 8, she said finally. And I'm not changing out of my work clothes. Perfect. I'll be downstairs. He kept his word. At 8:05, she found him waiting outside the hotel entrance beside a sleek black car with a driver already holding the door. I feel like I'm about to get kidnapped by a luxury sedan, she muttered as she slid into the back seat. Nathaniel chuckled. If I were going to kidnap you, I'd pick something flashier. Good to know. They drove through the city lights in silence for a few moments. She kept her hands in her lap, hyper-aware of the faint scent of his cologne and how little space there was between them. Where are we going? She asked. He looked over. Somewhere quiet. They pulled up to a discreet building near the riverfront. No sign, no crowd. Just a valet and 2 heavy wooden doors. This looks expensive, she whispered. It is. You're not helping. The hostess inside greeted Nathaniel by name and led them to a private terrace overlooking the water. Candles flickered on the table. A breeze lifted the linen napkins. Ella sat down slowly, brushing crumbs off her skirt. Okay, I take it back. This is kidnapping. Nathaniel smiled. Relax. I called ahead. Their server appeared with 2 menus and a bottle of something French. Ella didn't recognize half the dishes and decided to order whatever he did. When the appetizers arrived, she finally spoke. So, you do this a lot. Eat? Take women to restaurants where the silverware weighs more than my phone. He laughed softly. No. She tilted her head. Seriously. Seriously. I don't date much. Why not? He poured her a glass of wine before answering. Because most people want the version of me they read about. Not the one that exists. You're famous. Not exactly. But I've been in the news. She stared at him. Wait. Nathaniel Drake. The investor guy? The boardroom takeover thing? He nodded, eyes unreadable. She leaned back. You're the one who bought out that tech company in under 24 hours. The one that made the CEO cry on national TV. I didn't make him cry. You kind of did. He looked almost sheepish. It was business. You're a billionaire. He said nothing. She shook her head. You let me talk about my ramen budget while you sat there hiding a $1 billion portfolio? I wasn't hiding anything. You didn't ask. I thought you were just rich. Not rich. Nathaniel folded his hands. Would it have changed anything? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I don't know. Does it now? I don't think I like people who can afford private jets. I took a car tonight. Still. He leaned forward slightly. Ella, I didn't ask you to dinner because I wanted to impress you. I asked because I liked your company. That hasn't changed. She stared at the flickering candle between them. You do realize we come from different planets, right? Maybe. But I'm not asking you to move in. Just to finish dinner. So you are planning dessert? His smile returned, softer this time. Only if you are. They finished their entrees. The food was exquisite, but Ella barely tasted it. Her mind kept circling back to his name, the headlines, the idea that she'd been sitting across from one of the most powerful men in the city without even knowing it. When dessert came something with lavender ice cream and caramelized almonds, she pushed her plate away. You're not eating? He asked. I'm trying not to panic. Why? Because this doesn't happen to people like me. Nathaniel set down his fork. What does that mean? It means I work 10-hour shifts and worry about overdraft fees. It means I don't date men with drivers. I didn't ask you out because of what you have. I asked because of who you are. She glanced at him. And who exactly do you think I am? That's what I'm still figuring out. But I know I want to keep trying. Ella didn't respond. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the terrace, staring out at the water. After a moment, she asked, Have you ever had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries? No. Then you don't get it. You're right, he said behind her. But I'd like to. She turned slowly. He hadn't moved. He wasn't trying to come closer, wasn't trying to charm his way through the discomfort. He just stood there, honest and still. The wind tugged at her apron string. She didn't tie it tighter. I don't want to be a project, she said quietly. You're not. I don't want to be a secret either. You won't be. She believed him, and that terrified her. We should go, she said. He nodded, walking with her in silence back to the car. Inside, she stared out the window as they drove through the glittering city. When they reached her apartment, he didn't ask to come up. He opened the door for her, handed her the coffee cup she'd forgotten at dinner, and said, Good night, Ella. She paused in the doorway. Next time, she said, You're letting me pick the place. He smiled. Deal. Then he was gone. And for the first time in a long time, Ella didn't feel like the world was something happening to her. She felt like she might finally be stepping into it. Ella stood in the center of a boutique so luxurious it didn't have price tags, just sleek mannequins and a woman named Leanne who offered her sparkling water the moment she stepped through the doors. This is a kidnapping, Ella muttered under her breath. Nathaniel, standing beside her in a navy coat and gloves, didn't even flinch. You agreed, he said. Willingly. I agreed to pick the place. I picked a taco truck on 11th. You vetoed that, dragged me into this. this temple of silk, and now I'm being offered cucumber water. I feel like I'm about to be sacrificed. He gave her a look that was equal parts challenge and invitation. You said next time I'd let you pick. I didn't say I'd let you win. She narrowed her eyes, then glanced around. The boutique was empty save for a discreetly attentive staff and the kind of ambient music that sounded like it was composed by someone who only played piano on mountaintops. I'm not letting you buy me anything. Not asking to. Just try something on. Ella folded her arms. Why? Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I want to see you in something you didn't buy secondhand. Because you keep wearing those shoes even though they're falling apart. And because I think you deserve to know what it feels like to be seen. Her breath caught in her chest. I don't need clothes to be seen, she said. No, he replied. But sometimes it helps. She stared at him, unsure whether to slap him or kiss him. Ultimately, she let Leon lead her toward a row of shimmering dresses and tailored coats, promising herself she'd try on one thing, just one, and then find an escape route. Half an hour later, that promise was long gone. I can't breathe, Ella muttered as Leon zipped up the back of a slate blue gown so soft it felt like melted sky. You look divine, the attendant said, stepping aside. Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. You look like you just stepped off the cover of a European fashion spread. Ella turned slowly, her reflection catching her off guard. The dress fit like it had been stitched onto her body, hugging her waist and flaring slightly at the hem. Her hair, usually pulled into a practical bun, fell around her shoulders in loose waves Leanne had conjured with a few pins and some sort of magic serum. This is ridiculous, she said. I look like I'm impersonating someone with a trust fund. You look like yourself, Nathaniel said, walking forward. Just unedited. She met his eyes in the mirror. They were steady, quiet, and held none of the teasing from before. It's just a dress, she said. It's not. The room suddenly felt warmer than it had before. Okay, she said finally, breaking eye contact. You've had your fun. I'm taking it off and we're going to that taco truck. Nathaniel chuckled. Deal. But I'm buying the dress. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Ella turned sharply. Nathaniel, I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to show you something. I've seen enough. He studied her for a breath, then nodded. All right, no dress. She exhaled with relief until he added, but you're coming with me to the gala tomorrow. She blinked. What gala? The Langdon Foundation's annual charity event. Black tie, big donors, bigger consequences if I flake. Ella's eyes widened. You want me to go as your date? Yes. Why? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Because I want you there. She shook her head. I'm not some accessory. I don't do socialite parties and fake smiles. Good, he said. Because I have enough of those in my life. I need someone real in that room. She hesitated. That's not a small thing you're asking. I know. She stared at him, trying to read the angles of his expression. Everything about this man was sharp and composed, but beneath it was something else. Something raw. Finally, she exhaled. Fine. But I swear, if anyone asks me what hedge fund I run, I'm telling them I sell hot dogs on the subway. He smiled. I look forward to it. The next evening, Ella stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at herself in the dress she'd absolutely not let Nathaniel pay for. He'd somehow convinced the boutique to lend it for the evening, which sounded suspiciously like gifting with extra steps. Her hair had been twisted into an elegant updo by a stylist who'd shown up at her door with a kit the size of a carry-on, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She barely recognized herself. A knock at the door made her jump. When she opened it, Nathaniel stood there in a black tuxedo, his hair slicked back, a single white orchid in his hand. I'm underdressed, she said automatically. No, he said, scanning her. You're perfect. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just stepped out and let him lead her to the waiting car. The gala was held in a grand ballroom lit by crystal chandeliers and lined with ivory columns. Waiters drifted through with trays of champagne, and an orchestra played something sweeping and expensive in the corner. Ella felt like she'd stepped into a movie one she didn't belong in. But Nathaniel never left her side. He introduced her as Ella Dawson. Nothing more, nothing less. Not once did he mention her job or her background. And people listened to her, actually listened, as if she had every right to stand beside him. At one point, a woman in a red velvet gown leaned in and whispered, "Are you from the gallery in Tribeca? You look so familiar." Ella smiled politely. "No, but I get that a lot." Nathaniel's hand found hers beneath the table, lacing their fingers together without looking. When the speeches began, he leaned over and whispered, "We can sneak out after the auction." "Why sneak out?" "Because I want to show you something." After the final toast and a brief detour through the auction items, including a yacht trip Ella pretended to consider bidding on for laughs, they slipped out through a side door. The air outside was crisp, the city skyline glowing in the distance. Nathaniel led her to a waiting car, but this one wasn't the usual black sedan. It was a vintage convertible, silver with white leather seats. Ella raised an eyebrow. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer, just drove. They wound through the city until the lights faded and the buildings thinned. Eventually, he pulled up to a quiet overlook above the river. The city sparkled below them like a spilled jewelry box. Nathaniel cut the engine. "Come on." She followed him to the edge of the overlook where a small fire pit had already been lit and 2 Adirondack chairs waited. "I had them set it up earlier," he said, handing her a blanket from the back seat. "I figured we'd need a breather." Ella sat down, pulling the blanket over her lap. The fire crackled between them, warm and steady. "This is a lot," she said finally. "I know. I mean, who does this?" "I do." She looked at him. "Why me?" Nathaniel stared into the fire. "Because the first time you walked into my suite, you didn't care who I was. You didn't try to impress me. You weren't trying to get anything. You were just real. And I didn't realize how much I missed that until you stood in my doorway like a hurricane in sneakers." Ella laughed softly. "But more than that," he continued. "You make me think about things I've forgotten. You remind me that not everything has to be calculated. That honesty can be brave." She swallowed. "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of pretending." "Then don't pretend," he said. "Not with me." She turned to face him fully. "I don't know what this is. Neither do I. But I want to find out." The wind picked up around them, but Ella didn't feel cold. Not with him looking at her like that. Like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. So she said nothing. Just leaned over and kissed him. And everything else, the gala, the dress, the fear fell away. For the first time, she stopped trying to figure out how she got here. She just let herself be. Ella could hear her name echoing through the ballroom before she even stepped fully inside. She froze just past the archway, heels clicking to a stop on the marble floor, her breath catching as a wave of heat flushed her cheeks. All around her, heads turned. Conversations paused. Glasses hovered midair. And in the center of it all, Nathaniel stood beneath a cascade of golden light, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other holding a microphone. "I didn't plan to speak tonight," he said, voice steady, eyes locked on her. "But I've made a career out of knowing when to seize the moment. And I'm not about to miss this one." Ella couldn't move. It had been 2 weeks since the gala. 2 weeks of quiet mornings, shared coffees, and stolen hours between her double shifts and his meetings. 2 weeks of navigating the impossible contrast between their worlds, hers full of chaos and corners, his of curated calm. She had tried to keep her balance, but eventually something cracked. It had happened 2 days ago. She'd shown up at Nathaniel's penthouse after a long night shift, soaked from the rain, exhausted and unraveling. She didn't even make it past the kitchen before the words spilled out. "I don't think I can do this." Nathaniel had set his phone down slowly and turned to her with such stillness it made her ache. "You want to leave?" "I want to breathe," she whispered. "And I can't do that when I'm constantly wondering if I belong in your life." He didn't argue. Didn't beg. He just nodded, walked over, and brushed her damp hair back from her face. "If you walk away," he said, "I won't stop you, but I'll wait, however long it takes." She left without saying goodbye. Now, 2 days later, here he was with a microphone in hand and her name on his lips in a room filled with people who had no idea what she meant to him. "I've spent years building an empire," he said, voice calm but direct. "I've negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat on boards, and moved markets. But none of that taught me how to feel. Not until I met her." Ella's legs finally moved. She stepped further into the ballroom, eyes wide, heart pounding. "She walked into my life by mistake," he went on, carrying a tray of food and an apology. "And from that moment, everything changed. Not because she needed me, but because she didn't. She challenged me, surprised me, and made me remember what it means to actually live." People were watching her now. More than a few guests stepped aside to give her space as she walked through the crowd toward him. But she barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on him. "This room is full of people who know my name," he said, "but she's the only one who's ever really seen me." Ella stopped a few feet away from him. Nathaniel lowered the mic and handed it off to someone without looking. His eyes never left hers. "I was going to wait," he said quietly, "but I realized that waiting doesn't make anything safer. It just makes you miss what matters." She stepped closer. "What are you doing?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Ella's breath caught. "I know this is insane," he said. "We've known each other for a blink. But I've lived 100 lifetimes without you, and none of them were worth anything." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, unlike anything she'd ever imagined. A single diamond set in a thin platinum band. It didn't scream wealth. It whispered commitment. "I'm not asking you to become someone you're not," he said. "I'm asking you to stay exactly who you are, and let me love you for it. For as long as you'll let me." Ella stared at him, heart in her throat. Around them, the room had gone silent. The orchestra had stopped playing. The clink of glass and murmur of conversation had faded into nothing. "I don't belong in this world," she said quietly. He took her hand. "Then I'll build one that fits us both." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, took his face in her hands, and kissed him. Not a polite, camera-ready kiss, but something real. Something full of every unsaid word and every fear she tried to bury. The room erupted into applause, but she barely heard it. When she finally pulled back, she whispered, "Yes." Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking almost imperceptibly. "You just made every other decision in my life feel small." Later that night, they stood on the rooftop of his building, the city glowing beneath them. Ella leaned against the railing, the wind tugging at the hem of her dress. Nathaniel stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, watching her more than the skyline. "I don't want to be a trophy you won," she said softly. "You're not," he replied. "You're the reason I stopped chasing things that don't matter." She turned to him. "What if I mess this up?" "You won't." "I might. Then we'll figure it out. Together." She nodded slowly. "I want to keep working," she said. "I'm not quitting just because I have a ring now." "Good. I wasn't planning on asking. And I'm not moving into your penthouse tomorrow. I'll wait. And I still think your wine fridge is absurd." "That's fair." She finally smiled. "You don't make things easy." "I'm not supposed to," he said. "I'm supposed to make them worth it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a key. "This is for the brownstone in West Village. I bought it last week. It's not a palace. It's got creaky floors and a tiny kitchen. But it's ours. If you want it." "You bought a house?" "I bought a home. For us. If you say yes again." She took the key, running her thumb over the smooth metal. "You're relentless. I just know what I want. And if I say I need time, I'll wait. But I'll be downstairs each morning with your coffee just in case." She laughed, her voice catching on the wind. "You're impossible." He leaned in, brushing his mouth over her temple. "And completely yours." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in the hush of the city, the stars overhead, and the quiet certainty that no matter how impossible it had seemed, a wrong door, a tray of sushi, a billionaire who didn't want to be saved, they had found each other. And that was the only thing that made sense. The front door creaked open as Ella stepped into the brownstone, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors that still smelled faintly of varnish and possibility. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting amber streaks across the exposed brick walls. She paused in the foyer, closing the door behind her and pressing her back against it, heart pounding in a rhythm she hadn't quite mastered yet. It had been 3 weeks since Nathaniel handed her the keys. 3 weeks of slow mornings, of shared breakfast plates and mismatched socks, of work schedules negotiated around quiet dinners in the tiny kitchen and late-night debates over which light fixture belonged in the hallway. 3 weeks of learning how to fit together without cutting corners off themselves. She dropped her purse on the entry table and wandered through the front room. Boxes were still stacked against one wall, labeled in Nathaniel's neat handwriting. Books hers. Tools maybe kitchen? Ella's stuff do not open. A smile tugged at her lips. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, and a second later, she heard the unmistakable sound of a ceramic mug being set down. "You're up early," Nathaniel's voice called. She found him at the stove, sleeves rolled up, his tie slung over the back of a chair, flipping something in a pan with an intensity usually reserved for his boardroom negotiations. "I had a meeting with the marketing agency," she said. "They want to start testing concepts for the consulting launch next month." He turned, brow lifting. "You're going through with it?" "I signed the papers this morning." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment before crossing the kitchen and pulling her into a kiss that made her forget what time it was. She grabbed the lapels of his shirt to steady herself, and when they finally broke apart, she was laughing. "It's just a small launch. It's the first step," he said. "You built this from nothing." "I had help." Nathaniel handed her a plate. "You had grit." "I just happened to notice it first." Ella leaned against the counter, picking at the edge of her toast. "You know they still don't believe me." "Who?" "The board members at the foundation. They think I'm some kind of long con." Nathaniel poured himself a second cup of coffee. "Let them think it. I don't like being underestimated. Then keep proving them wrong." She watched him stir a little cream into the coffee. "You really think I can do this?" "I think you already are." Later that afternoon, they stood side by side in the backyard, which was more of a patch of soil and stubborn grass than anything else. Ella held a half-empty bag of mulch while Nathaniel, in a t-shirt and sneakers she still suspected he didn't know how to lace properly, struggled to position a wooden planter box. "This was your idea," he said, adjusting the angle again. "You said you wanted to grow something." "I meant metaphorically." Ella tossed a bag of soil at his feet. Too late. They spent the next hour in the dirt, arguing over tomato spacing and debating whether basil should be kept in pots or beds. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, they were both covered in streaks of soil and laughing too hard to care. As they rinsed off at the outdoor faucet, Nathaniel turned to her, water dripping from his jawline. "I've never done this before," he said. "Gardening? No. This, all of it. Building something from nothing. With someone." Ella reached up and brushed a clump of soil from his temple. "Neither have I." He caught her wrist gently, holding it for a heartbeat. "Does it scare you?" "Every day." "Same." That night, they curled up on the worn couch in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Nathaniel had one arm wrapped around her shoulders, the other lazily flipping through a stack of real estate proposals she'd found in one of his unopened boxes. "You're still looking at properties?" she asked, resting her head against his chest. "Old habits. You planning on buying half the city?" "Only the parts you like." She tilted her head to look up at him. "You don't need to buy me anything." "I know. But I like giving you what you never asked for." Ella closed her eyes, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. "No one's ever made me feel like I could just exist." "You don't just exist," he said. "You change the air." The next week brought new chaos. Her consulting launch picked up steam, and Nathaniel's firm closed a major acquisition that sent headlines spiraling. Their schedules collided and overlapped, forcing them to learn how to manage time instead of just steal it. One night, after a particularly long day, Ella came home to find Nathaniel asleep on the couch, a folder open on his chest, his tie askew. She sat beside him, gently easing the folder away. Inside were documents for a new philanthropic initiative, a grant program for women launching businesses in underserved communities. Ella's name was at the top of the proposal. She stared at it for a long time before setting it aside and curling up beside him, tucking herself into his warmth. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent, and she kissed his forehead. "You're impossible," she whispered. He didn't wake, but his hand found hers in his sleep. 2 months later, she stood in front of a small crowd at a rooftop garden in Brooklyn, a microphone in her hand and the skyline glowing behind her. It was the launch of her consulting firm's first major initiative, micro-business mentoring and funding for women navigating post-crisis recovery. The same women her mother had once sat beside in hospital waiting rooms. The same women she'd watched juggle 3 jobs and still show up with pride. Nathaniel stood in the back, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face as he watched her speak. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to stand beside her. He just let her shine. After the applause, she found him near the wine table, nursing a glass of something sparkling. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it." Ella looked around at the rooftop, at the string lights and the laughter and the way the evening air wrapped around them like a promise. "I think I finally believe this is real." Nathaniel reached for her hand. "Then maybe it's time we stop building separate lives." "What does that mean?" "It means we stop talking about someday and start living it." Ella's breath caught. "Are you asking me to move in?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me. Not in pieces. Not between meetings. Fully." She looked up at him, heartful. "Okay." They moved into the brownstone fully that weekend. No separate closets. No emergency exit plans. Just a shared calendar, a single set of keys, and a joint decision to stop letting fear dictate their pace. Weeks turned into seasons, and the garden they planted bloomed wild with herbs and tangled tomato vines. Her consulting firm expanded. His philanthropic foundation funded programs he never would have thought to start without her influence. They argued, they compromised, they kept growing. One crisp morning, as the first snow of winter dusted the narrow street outside, Nathaniel pulled her close beside the window, a steaming mug in each hand. "What if we got married?" he asked suddenly. Ella blinked. "That's not usually how people propose." "I didn't want to make it a production. I just wanted to ask the question." She took a sip from the mug. "Do I still get a ring?" He reached into his pocket and handed her a box. Inside was a new ring, one with a tiny sapphire nestled beside the diamond. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. She kissed him. They were married that spring under a canopy of cherry blossoms in the backyard. Tasha cried so hard she had to reapply her makeup twice. And Nathaniel's best man forgot his speech and winged it with a toast that made the entire crowd laugh until it hurt. There were no media cameras, no headlines, just friends, family, and the soft hum of something sacred. Afterward, they danced barefoot on the grass. As evening fell, Ella looked around at the home they'd built, real and imperfect and entirely their own. Nathaniel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She leaned back into him. "That I'm glad I knocked on the wrong door." He smiled against her temple. "Best mistake of my life." They stood there as the sky faded from rose to indigo, the lights of the city flickering to life in the distance. And for the first time in either of their lives, everything felt exactly right.